Hi, my name is Rene Abrino. You may know me as RJ, and I'll be presenting my evaluation on the writing process of my AOC benchmark. This is the read-through of my AOC benchmark's final draft. Volunteering should not be required to graduate. A teenager is working on a grueling task given by his teacher at home and looks at the calendar, filled with dates, extracurriculars, and hangouts with friends, and cannot find any time to give up for volunteering hours. Teenagers in high schools across the nation are ending up in the same position as the teenager mentioned above, left with a few more hours to complete and a lot more deadlines to meet. The mandatory volunteering required to receive a high school diploma is argued to be both beneficial and educational to children, but it does not take into account the lives of each student who wishes to graduate from high school. In order to earn a high school diploma, students should not be required to volunteer or attend mandatory service because it promotes positive and educational growth, signifies the importance of volunteering, but also supports flexibility for a student's schedule, whether it is private or public. In a way, the future is supposed to be filled with opportunities and freedom to do whatever they wish to do as teenagers grow older. But with mandatory service hours being present, it can rid students from growing healthier in both mental and social growth. Published by the New York Times, The Logic of Mandatory Volunteerism presented a community in which the New York City Board of Education studied the idea in the middle of the 1900s, in which they dropped it after finding that some administrators nationwide viewed it as a distraction from academic studies. In addition, it was implemented in the state of a punishment, not as a requirement, which can be seen that mandatory service is more of a punishment than it was as a helpful tool for children to grow. Students should be focusing more on studying for work and extracurricular activities than clearing out days for possible volunteering hours that do not contribute to their growth at all. With too much work to bear, teenagers can be overloaded with tasks and suffer harshly in their work, discouraging growth in both the educational and mental sides of high school students. Fortunately, volunteering is very important and beneficial for children, teenagers, and adults in the world, but it should not be forced onto students to complete as it can result in a labor decrease from volunteering as a whole in the future. In a source named Community Service Requirements Seen to Reduce Volunteering, senior students in Maryland were studied from 1997 to 2011 on their engagement in service activities from before and after the requirement, in which students were 7.8 percentage points more likely than students nationally to be engaged in service activities, until after the service requirement, in which Maryland seniors were 9.2 percentage points to 17.4 percentage points less likely to volunteer. In contrast, seniors before the mandatory service requirement were more likely to volunteer in service activities, but when it became mandatory, students became less likely, if not lesser, to volunteer in service activities after graduation. Volunteering is important and can serve as a positive environment for growth in all ages of people, but if mandatory service causes students to break away from volunteering after graduation, then there is no more room for growth and destroys the significance of volunteering in general. Unfortunately, the mass majority of people argue for volunteering, talking about how it fits perfectly with the student's schedule, and if there is trouble, the district can help. The same statement was made by a high school in Arkansas and enforces the mandatory service requirement in order to graduate from high school. The district requires at least 75 hours of volunteering before graduation, and if time cannot be made up, they will intervene and support them. For more insight, this does not apply to other states in the nation that are enforcing this new mandate, since some schools lack the proper time and resources in order to enforce public service to their students, and students lack time to complete their mandatory hours. In an article published by the New York Times, The Logic of Mandatory Volunteerism, the reader is introduced to the harsh reality that some students have to face, in which most students have to work to make money because a lot of them are supporting themselves, due to being a 50% poverty district and 60% minor. Unlike other students, some do not have enough time to work on service projects because they are dealing with their own personal problems like financial displacement or more. Students may have to work to pay for their own trip to school or make a living in their lives, so it is not possible for them to complete mandatory hours with all of that work on their hands. Districts argue that service hours will have a place in a student's schedule, allowing for flexibility and freedom as a teenager, but it marks the environment for the generally lacking students as unfair for mandatory service hours that they may never complete. To put it into conclusion, The harsh, unequal, and negative impact that mandatory service hours have on students are not put into fair consideration with the positive influences and effects of required volunteering hours for students. Volunteering is supposed to have importance and value. It is a right that students should be doing willingly, not done as an assignment. If students want to be taught and encouraged to go into certain fields, they should be taught through school and extracurricular activities outside of it, not through mandatory hours that can be seen as a homework assignment or a project with less value, because that ruins the point of volunteering. Now, for my self-evaluation, I rated myself poorly on planning and organization, somewhat decent for audience and use of technology, and very good for revision and editing. The reason why I rated myself a 1 for the planning is because I lacked any pre-writing, as you'll see, and I never really organized myself for anything regarding the AOC benchmark. But it should be important for me to state that the AOC benchmark strictly stated absolutely no external sources or links. On the other hand, I was very effective with making my point across, and I had a persuasive tone throughout the benchmark. I was able to utilize technology because we were only allowed to use Google Docs, Google Classroom, and the sources given to us. Fortunately, I was very successful in my revisions and editing, and you'll see in the upcoming slides, I was able to find what was important and necessary in my content, structure, and style. I also implemented the things I learned before and put that into my edits to improve clarity and remove clutter. As seen in my pre-writing, there isn't much, and it was mainly just set up for what I planned before I made the essay. In my first draft or drafting part of the essay, it was mostly improvisation and edited along the way of my work. For support, the work made at 10:17 a.m. right here is a good example of this. As explained before, I revised along the way during my drafting of the essay. Then after I was finished with the drafting, I revised the rest of my essay, including the title of my benchmark. Compared to everything else, there was nothing much for publishing. The reason for this is because it is an AOC benchmark, so we had no outside help for the assignment, and we were also running on limited time and resources, so we had to work with what we had. Now, one success I had during this benchmark was my ability to implement lessons I learned from English during the semester and past years at AOC. But definitely one challenge was the limited resources and support due to the essay being a benchmark. We were only allowed to use the given sources. Now, for the works, I think that the direct quotes in my introduction paragraph worked fairly well for me. But compared to my transitions and relevancy, it needs some work for sure, and I definitely messed up on multiple parts throughout the essay. Because in certain parts of the essay, I would lack emphasis or importance, and it wouldn't look so well for the audience, and it would make my argument unclear. Now my writing goal. My writing goal is to implement smoother transitions, lead-ins, and direct quotations with proper citations for empowering clarity and impacting consistency throughout the paper. This has been my goal since the beginning of the semester, and I hope that this will continue to be my goal throughout next semester and probably the years to come, because I definitely have problems and struggles with implementing direct quotations still to this day. Now, this image may look pretty problematic to most people, but I will explain. The image for my analogy is a potato mine from Plants vs. Zombies. The reason for this is because it is the cheapest plant in the game, and you need to improvise with its playstyle whenever you are in a bit of trouble. It also requires 14 seconds to charge up, which means you have to play against time to truly use it to its true potential. Now, what does this have to do with my AOC benchmark? Improvisation and a race against time. Well, that's the end. Thank you for watching my presentation.